So there's a framework that I use when I'm entering some sort of task where I'm trying to reach some outcome, whether it be a conversation with somebody or I'm making a video or making a post on social media. Really, it could be any action that you take where you're looking for some outcome at the end of it. You're looking for something to happen as a result of it, which really is most things. But the idea is when you're looking to do that, there's a framework you can use to try and ensure that you take a very rational, logical, efficient approach to that, to help you try and achieve the outcome that you're trying to get to. And the framework that I use is a three-part one. It goes objective, reality, rational actions. Right? So you can think of it as ORR if you wanted to. But the idea is everything you do, whatever actions you're taking, whatever it is you're about to engage into, whether it be a conversation or whatever, a project at work, whatever, you start off by saying, what's my objective? And really thinking deeply, challenging yourself to understand what's the true objective of this action or this activity I'm about to partake in. So the reason I say think really deeply about it is you can think about you're about to make a tweet. And superficially or first level, you think about that tweet you're about to make, and it's meant to be a tweet to educate people on some topic. Let's totally make it up. Let's say it's gun control, and you think we need stricter gun control laws. And you're thinking, I'm going to make a tweet because I have an interesting perspective or viewpoint on this that I think if I share, people will hear it, and people that maybe don't believe in as strong of gun control laws as I do will be forced to rethink that, and maybe they'll even change their mind, and I'll win some people over, if you will. So you state that as your objective, and you make this tweet. But you see this happen very often where you could see somebody doing that, but then within the tweet, it can be condescending or insulting or jump to conclusions about the other side and why they think gun control laws aren't necessary in a way that mocks them in some way. And it makes you recognize that, hey, if my objective was really to change that person's mind, this might not help me get to that objective. So what really was my objective? Was my objective just to vent because I was angry and it felt good? Was my objective to get people on my side to be riled up and support and feel good about what I was saying? Was my objective to ultimately demean or insult that person? That's what I wanted to do. Or was it really what I'm stating, that it was to try and change somebody's mind? And what happens is it's super important to identify that objective up front, because that's going to guide the things you do and the next couple steps in the framework. So you want to get that right up front. And you'd be surprised how often people think their objective is something good and an objective truth that they want to find, but they don't. They want to validate their own views, that type of thing. So important to think deeply. The mental toughness we've talked about, really required in that first step to spend time and identify your objective. Once you do, then you can go to the second step, which is the reality. So understand the reality of the situation. May seem simple, may seem like something that should happen very quickly, but it really needs to be a thoughtful thing where you spend a lot of time to really assess all the aspects of the reality. This is that time where you really want to get all perspectives and understand what's really going on here. So sticking with the scenario of, you're going to make a tweet to try and change somebody's mind or a group of people's minds. If you're going to do that, you need to understand the reality of the situation. You need to understand what is it that's driving their current viewpoints. Are they just so blindly dug into what they believe that anything you say isn't going to matter? Because if that's the case, then you have to think about, well, how am I actually going to achieve this objective if the reality is as such? You also have to think about the reality from your perspective. What are the biases you might hold? What are the things that you may be overlooking or blind spots you might have because you feel so passionate about this thing, or you think you have the right answer or the right perspective, so you're just making assumptions that you think are facts, and they're not. So you really need to understand that reality of the situation, because that's going to be the lens in which you try and get to that objective, right? That reality is going to prevent you from getting there possibly. So you really need to account for it if you want to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And then those two steps will lead to the last step, which is what I call rational actions. So the idea would be you set your objective, you identify the reality, understand it, account for it, and then based on that, you identify the rational actions you should take to actually help you achieve the objective you set forth. Now, that should go sequentially, but certainly as you go through the steps, you might have to circle back. Maybe as you start to look at the reality of the situation, you say, well, maybe my objective needs to be different because given the reality, I'm never going to achieve the thing I want, so let me try some other variation of it. Likewise, it might be that you get to the rational actions, and as you're starting to lay them out, you start to realize maybe there's something about the reality I'm not, understanding here. So it certainly can be circular to some extent. But the theory being that if you go through those steps, it's a very easy and clean way to ensure that you're optimizing for what you're trying to achieve, right? You're taking the most efficient approach you can to get there. You're staying rational, you're staying logical. It helps to eliminate biases or heuristics or emotions that might come into play and might stop you from achieving that objective. So a valuable tool that I've used, and I thought in the last couple minutes here, I would just give an example that happened very recently of a time in which I kind of failed at using this framework. And the scenario was in a conversation with my mother, actually. And I have kind of an ongoing dialogue going with my mother around topics, politics, social views, current events that are happening, particularly with the coronavirus going on right now, things like that. And for context, so my mother's a pretty staunch conservative. She is an intelligent person who has the ability to definitely be open-minded and understand different perspectives, and she does that at times. But sometimes, because her beliefs are so core to her identity, she can get very dug in. She can have blind spots. She can take shortcuts where she sees a situation happen and she just jumps to the conclusion of, well, if the person that did it is on the conservative side, then I probably support it. If somebody that did it is on the liberal side, I probably don't, right? So you get kind of that inconsistent application of values and views, etc. So the ongoing dialogue that we're having, as I think about it through this framework I just laid out, my objective is to try and push her to more seek objective truth, to think and seek rational thought, to try and eliminate those biases and those shortcuts she takes and really try and get the full picture, not just the perspective she often looks at it through. And as I've talked about in previous videos, that is a long-term game. It's not a short-term one-off thing, and that's a reality that I've started to accept, right? Because her identity is so tied to it, because she can be an emotional, defensive person. If you approach conversations like this in the wrong way, it can very easily get derailed, and I've had it happen a number of times. So the reality is there's certain characteristics about her and our relationship, and myself for that matter, and my belief that people just should see these things, rationally and clearly, that can cause friction when we have these conversations. So per the framework, I need to account for that and take rational actions. If my objective is as such that I want her to continue to push and try and get to be more seeking rational objective truth and rational objective thoughts, then I need to play it the right way. I can't just go in head on and argue or insult or condescendingly say, how are you not seeing this, and try and make my points in that manner. It has to be a bit of a dance and a give and take, and picking your battles on certain points and conceding certain points to get her to see the bigger picture and slowly walking her down the path of it. In our most recent conversation, though, I failed at that. We had one of those conversations that turned into more or less an argument and all those things where my objective certainly was not met. And as I reflected on it after the fact, where I think I messed up, where I think the framework broke for me was my objective piece. Going into the conversation, as it always is, I knew the objective that I thought I wanted to achieve. But in the midst of the conversation, as it got a little bit heated and emotional, and I felt offended in certain ways and felt like she was really being irrational and difficult and, trying to make it difficult to have the conversation. My objective switched in the heat of the moment without me really acknowledging it towards more, hey, I need to put her in her place. I need to let her know that her approach is wrong, and that from like a intellectual dominance perspective, I need to show her where she's messing up here. So it no longer became about getting her to improve in the way in which I knew that had to happen. It became more about my own satisfaction of, showing her this intellectual dominance and showing her that she was just doing it wrong. And as a result, even though I still knew the reality of the situation, my actions changed, and it started to go towards more yelling and more extreme viewpoints, and how I thought she was wrong, and insulting in some ways, all those types of things, which again, with my new objective, which was, hey, I need to put you in your place, made perfect sense, extremely rational towards that objective, but that wasn't the objective that I went into the conversation with. So it just highlights an example of A, how this framework can be used, both up front and as kind of a post-mortem debrief after the fact, but B, the ways in which it can break down. And I'll kind of continue to use this framework at different times in these videos, because I think it's a good lens to look at when things do break down or when things go well, if you stick to that tool or that framework.